Today we're talking tiny. Oh, jeez. All right, people, I'm Garrett, this is Making Movies, and today we're talking tiny. This thing's dangerous to fly. It's got these little blinky lights. Let's see if I can, oh no. Enough of that. This is the DJI Osmo Pocket. It is the smallest thing I've ever seen that can do what this does. It's a 3-axis gimbal, the same way that the Ronin S or the Ronin M or the Ronin 2, all of those work in the same fashion, which is we have a camera in the middle and then it's stabilized on 3-axis so that no matter how I move it, it's able to maintain a steady image. It, for all intents and purposes, fits in your pocket. It is actually one of the few devices that lives up to its name. It's so unbelievably portable, and the footage that you can get out of this is pretty wild. Like, watch what happens when you turn this on. I'm gonna, hold on. Look at that. If you're shooting in standard and you're a vlogger and you're just gonna be walking around doing this, that's all good and fine. This out of the box will do everything that you need it to do. That said, if you wanna shoot more cinematically, whether you wanna shoot in like a flat profile, variable frame rates, there's a mode in here called Pro mode. Keeping that in mind, I wanna show you what my settings are for the DJI Osmo that gets me the most cinematic looking stuff. I guess I need to qualify what I mean when I say cinematic looking footage, so here. All of that was shot on this using the following settings. All right, when we turn the Osmo on, it's going to calibrate itself, fire up, and then it's going to give us this display. We'll have the battery indicator in the top right. Underneath that at the bottom right, it will show us how much space is left on our SD card. Between the battery icon and the SD icon, there's a little gray rocker. That rocker allows us to use the touchscreen to adjust the tilt control of the Osmo Pocket. In this default mode, anywhere I touch on this little touch screen is going to adjust both the exposure and the focus to give us the optimal out-of-the-box settings. Now, that's not what I want. That's not going to give us the most this camera has to offer, but that's what we have out of the box. When I pull down from the top, we have a couple of options here. By default, it gives us the settings. If I pull from the left, it will then give me my quality options. You have two options, what they are calling fine and then super fine. Fine is represented by this single star. If I tap on it, it will then give me the option for super fine with this warning that says shooting in super fine video mode might cause this to heat up. It will obviously take a little bit more battery power and it will use a little bit more SD card space, but it does give us the best quality image possible. In my settings mode, it just gives me a couple of things. I can adjust the tilt control, calibrate the gimbal, and look at my battery life in addition to formatting cards and really basic stuff. Nothing we really need to worry about for this video. Next to settings, we have our window option. Now, by default, it will give us a full display in this little square window of what we're shooting. But because we're shooting widescreen and not in full frame, there's parts of our frame that are missing on either side just to maximize the use of this screen. I don't like that as much. I like to see the entirety of the frame that I'm shooting in. So if you tap on that icon, it will give you kind of a window in window display. This will then shrink what we're seeing, but give us the entirety of the frame. I like shooting in this window in window display. It allows me to see everything that I'm shooting. And the screen's already so small, the difference between seeing it in full frame versus seeing it window in window doesn't matter to me. Swiping over again, these are our autofocus settings. We have autofocus constant. If we tap on it again, it gives us autofocus single. Autofocus constant is basically having a focus puller. It's constantly going to be monitoring what we're looking at and pulling focus accordingly. And the autofocus in this is pretty good. I leave it on autofocus constant most of the time because I do a lot of movement on the Z space and I need to make sure that whatever I'm looking at is in perfect focus. Now, I will use autofocus single every now and again. So like if I'm doing a reveal shot from behind something to reveal something else, I want to make sure that I'm focused on whatever that far object is. So I'll go to my final point, tap focus, go back behind, and then do a reveal, and I'm already in focus for whatever I'm ending up landing at. Swiping over again, we now have Pro. These are the settings that we really want to enable. So if I tap on Pro, it's going to say to enter Pro settings, hit the Pro icon, I hit OK. In the top left corner, you can see there's the camera icon with a little yellow icon that says Pro. If I tap on that, this now brings up a whole host of other settings. In the top left corner, we have our color profiles. By default, it's set to normal. Normal would be basically the equivalent of standard. If I tap on that again though, it gives me the option for D-Cine-like. This is a much flatter profile. This would be something not quite a log, but between standard and a log, giving us more flexibility in post to do things like color correction and color grading and make it look however we want it to look. Next to our color profiles is white balance. By default, it's set to auto white balance, but you have all of the standard white balance options. We tap into here, you see that there's sunny, cloudy, incandescent, fluorescent, and then underneath that, we have Kelvin readouts. So we can have custom Kelvin control to get the best possible white balance. So if I'm shooting in a studio environment and I know exactly what the color readout is, I can match that and know that I have perfect white balance. But the auto white balance in this camera does work surprisingly well. So when I'm using this, generally I'm moving in and out of different environments, changing all the time, and I don't necessarily want to get a color readout every time I'm setting up a shot. So by and large, I leave it in auto, but if you are staying in a single place with a single temperature, I would set it to that temperature to then go and shoot. In the bottom left corner, we have our exposure options. If I tap on this, this gives me two options across the bottom. Auto is set by default, and then next to that is the letter M. M, of course, stands for manual. So we tap M. This now brings up two different options. In the left column, we have our shutter speed, and in the right column, we have our ISO. This camera goes up to 3200 ISO. That said, the 3200, in my opinion, is 100% unusable. It's way too noisy and grainy. Even 1600 has enough noise that for me makes it pretty unusable. So I would cap out my ISO in this camera at about 800. 800 has a little bit of noise, not enough to make it noticeable or to degrade the quality of your image. Going back to the left, we have our shutter speed. Now, general rule of thumb, you want your shutter speed to be double that of your frame rate. Having said that, you can play with the shutter speed to give you more interesting looks. So like if we slow down our shutter speed beneath double that of our frame rate, it's gonna give us a kind of a smeary, soft looking image, where if we crank it up beyond double our frame rate, it's gonna get much crispier and crunchy. That's particularly helpful if you're shooting in higher frame rates, where you want each individual frame to be its own crisp frame, so then that way during playback, though the playback is smooth and buttery, it is still a very tack sharp image. Of course, the side effect of that being the faster our shutter speed, the darker our image, so that works better in really, really well lit environments versus kind of trying to play in low light. Across the top, we have an exposure readout. This is just what the camera thinks that the exposure level is at for what is being recorded. Because this screen is so small, it's a good way to kind of see where we're at exposure-wise, or what at least the camera thinks our exposure is set at. That is our shutter speed, our ISO, and our exposure readout. So I hit OK, it takes us back to this menu. The last option that I have is related to audio. I have audio volume, auto, low, medium, high. I leave it on auto. The audio in this is pretty atrocious. I don't think that it's usable. There are accessories that are coming soon that allow us to plug an external mic into this to get better in-camera audio, but for now, I would record audio externally, use this as scratch audio, and then sync to the cleaner audio. Now, if I pull from the left, you'll then see that I have my different camera settings. So I have video, photo, slow-mo, time-lapse, panorama, all these different options. Of course, for what I'm using, we're going to be in video. If I swipe over one more time, this is where I have my video settings. On the left, we have our resolutions, and on the right, we have our frame rate. I always shoot in 4K. I don't really use this camera as a 4K export. I would generally downsample this from 4K to 1080, but getting a good clean 4K image allows me to do any sort of extra post stabilization or reframing, and downsizing it to 1080 then gives me a super clean image coming out of this. That's what I like, that's how I use this, but we push this to 4K. This camera does up to 60 frames per second in 4K, but generally I will be shooting this in 24. We're back to the main menu. In the top left corner, I have the resolution that I want, I have the frame rate that I want, I get an exposure meter readout. This now is a cinematic monster. My favorite thing about this is the fact that, I can keep this on me all of the time. I can get several hours of recording out of this if I'm turning it on and off between takes. I've taken this out for a full day and shot with it, just various clips kind of throughout the day, and that's worked perfectly fine. I didn't notice the battery draining all that quickly, which is perfect for what I'm using it for. That's how I get this thing to give me the most cinematic look possible. If you found this video interesting, give it a like. If you want to see more stuff like this, hit subscribe, and as always, I'll see you in the next episode.